So anyway, in the beginning of it, so far I've only watched like whatever 2 minutes. He's kind of arguing that somehow we're not on the internet to convince each other of something.
I didn't say we weren't. I said I wasn't.
And we're sort of loosely affiliated under this concept of atheism, which is basically attempting to convince these Christians that they got it wrong and that they have to get it right for a reason.
When have I ever taken atheism that way? To me, it is without theism. It is exactly like, look, there's no theism. I would rather show people, look, here's a place with no theism. Look, it all works. Here's how the structures all work. There's no theism over there. Than convince them to move there. Maybe they could wait. What you were talking about is anti-theism. Oh, we must convince them. No, I must convince them of some things. And I don't think it's going to happen for me on the internet. Things like don't steal, don't rob, don't take things, don't pick up stuff that isn't yours, don't... Oh, there's got to be another crime. Okay, pillage, murder. Oh, pillage is a crime.
Yeah, the whole point is to try to construct an argument. You know, a pile of words or a message or an image that will, you know, get this ball of rationality rolling.
I do those things. I make arguments. You can see I make arguments. I don't have to do that in order to convince you. I'm not entirely unconcerned when I convince people. I know people all the time. And often they don't admit they were convinced. They don't know they were convinced. Convinced doesn't really fit. They just start using the idea that I've been advocating. Maybe they talked to their auntie and she convinced them, or they, one way or another, in my theory, convinced themselves. But I put up all kinds of facts that is convincing. I put all kinds of... But the thing is, it's what convinced me. It's what convinced me. Okay. Now, it is important sometimes to convince people of things. Okay, I use the crime example, but that's actually a lesser example, because if a criminal is disposed towards those things, then frankly, it's just me versus them. But, you know, there are other examples, right, of convincing people. For example, your children. You have to convince your children of certain things, and often it doesn't work out, but you have to convince them. But I don't want to treat you like my children, especially since, you know, even then, it doesn't really work out. People have to convince themselves. You have to put the evidence down there, and when you do convince a child, they have to feel that they've convinced themselves. The problem with convincing people is that you're not going to use your truths, what seems true to you. If you're focused on convincing other people, you're going to use other people's truths. And think about it. An argument is not valid based on how many people or who it convinces. It's valid based on rules of validity, coherence, you know, freedom from internal contradiction. Things like that make an argument valid. And if you can tell if an argument is valid, then you, for your own good, should be convinced by it. And it is not my responsibility at that last step to make sure you are actually convinced. You have the emotional conviction. That is your deal. You, if you want to be logical, but some people, we call them the majority, are not convinced that way anyway. And if you focus on convincing them, you have to use their logic, including their illogic. If they're a theist, you'll say, well, God called me on the phone, has a message for you. Okay? And you will deviate more and more from what you really believe to convince other people of things that are similar, but not the same as things you used to believe. So eventually you won't even know what you believe. Or you might know it, but you'll be very, very far from what set you on that course. I am staying true to what I believe and just taking the approach of being honest about how I got to those conclusions and why I do the things I do and so on.
I can't prevent my own future birth. I just can't do it unless...
Man, I'm just stop right there because there is no unless, okay? There is no unless. Maybe you should stop trying to do that. It leads to irrational actions because there is no unless. to that statement.
All these people talk about somehow how I've reconstructed their arguments when it's just so clear who's doing that. You make a metaphor about a 2-year-old and all of a sudden you're a baby killer. I mean, it's just insane. You talk about a red button for the human race, and now all buttons are red, and then even if you do a thought experiment with a clearly green button in it, they turn it into a red button. I mean, there's just no way of escaping all this distortion.
Yes, there is. What are you talking about? You don't notice. I have not done any of those things. I didn't try to nail you for those. In fact, I discuss them as abstractions, and if I feel your abstractions get uncomfortable, I say, well, it is sort of uncomfortable. I see this part of it. I don't do that. There is an escape from that extortion. Talk to people that aren't trying to just convince you of everything and have to lie their ass off to try to do it because they're desperate. Just give up on that. You have an aesthetic of logic that at least values information. I don't think you have all the right information, etc. But follow that desire to live in information, all right? And if that means people are slower than you want getting to your ideas, they'll make up for it in how long they stay at them.
Why the hell would I care about this conversation if it wasn't for a purpose?
You wouldn't, Gary. You wouldn't if it wasn't for a purpose. You just have the purpose wrong.
No, I'm sorry, I just don't get it. I mean, if you're not trying to cause me some cognitive dissonance, then yeah, maybe you are just completely wasting my time.
The thing is in Mayhem is this: everybody is different, and I just naturally cause cognitive dissonance. And by the way, cognitive dissonance, I would like permission. That would make a great band name, and I would like permission to use that as a book title. But I naturally cause cognitive dissonance, and this is a complaint I get often. So I feel I probably don't have to enhance that other than it by, sort of directing it to a point where, for me, the point is to be as honest as possible, because I'm already naturally causing cognitive dissonance, and I don't have to do any more would be like intentionally confusing people. Instead, I'm just trying to clarify things for people. Ultimately, the evidence I've seen and why it convinces me, and in such a way that they could look for the evidence themselves. And so it's because of where I'm coming from, If I tended to make people resolute in their convictions and they understood exactly their identity related to what I've said, instead of making them go, what, huh, now, where is, and okay, and you saw this, no, but maybe, then I would have to have different, a different emphasis probably to my interaction. Also, I'm plenty convincing. To be any more convincing would be to be manipulative.
I don't like having the message being too packaged, but the practical fact is that's what creates convincing for a lot of people. So I have to consider that. There's a point where I have to clean it, and but I'm still sort of uncertain about that path, and what the right clean path is. And so I'm still wanting to get a little more clarity about what I want to do with this image before I pick a path. And maybe I'm just, I don't know if I'm lazy, but yeah, I'm just not there yet. So yeah, anyway, this is turning into a video in itself. Sorry about that, but I'll watch the rest. 19 minutes of talking about why you don't have to convince people. Oh, I don't know, but we'll see where it goes. Anyway, till next time. Alright, I'll try to make this one short. Yeah, I'm a little further into this video, and now he's sort of talking like, if I tell you a weather report, you just judge me over time at how accurate my weather reports are or something, or, this, like he just spouts something, and he doesn't have to has no obligation to his audience to put it into a context or to refine it or to perfect it.
This is where behavior and experiment and empiricism come in. I do all those things. I refine my argument. I list the details. I describe how they work in the source materials. I do those things. So why does it have to be to convince you? That's the thing. I have motivations. To be honest about what I think and why I think, it requires doing all those things. It just also requires I don't lie, mislead, or propagandize.
He just has an obligation to throw it out there, and somehow by time and credibility you'll either accept or reject, which is kind of stupid.
Okay, Gary, mano a mano. You and me, just nobody else, no convincing, it doesn't matter. Nobody else is even going to understand what I'm saying to you now. But you will. Right. The problem here is you have been and I have talked to each other for 3 years or something. You have rejected me, and yet you still talk to me. And a hard part of this, maybe for you to face and people to face, is that means a kind of embrace. So if somebody talks to Venom Fang X for 3 years and rejects, they've also embraced them, for example, as an icon of what they disagree with. You can easily describe that embrace and find, oh, it's a negative kind of whatever. This is what you and me as well have to face. I deal with that. I address that in videos. Well, why would I talk to Gary? He's so rude. Okay, so I address that, and the fact of the matter is that by my standards, is a difficult thing for you to gauge what the purpose of your presence here is, because by my standards, see, I'm not trying to convince you. That's what you're rejecting. This apparent contradiction of rejecting and embracing is really just because, okay, it sounds like a contradiction in language, but at the macroscope, the human scale we live in, of course, because you're rejecting accepting certitude of what I'm saying. But by my standards, you're not rejecting me because I'm not trying to convince you. I'm trying to get you to listen to me. And I believe ideas soak in, and I believe this is a natural process, a more healthy way to get ideas. I try to absorb ideas and put them out there, and I don't try to shove them or inject them, needles or any of that. And so people wait, to beat Piero, he's just admitted why sometimes he complains about being blocked, because he admits that all I need to do to win against him is not listen. And that's right. That's all you have to do to win. But the reason you won't really be winning is because my ideas are good for you. They're not going to harm you. They're going to shine light, because even though I have wrong ideas that could be harmful, I'm not trying to inject those into you. So you have some control of your own immune system, and yet the ideas can still be positive for you. Okay, so this kind of thing explains why you could reject my ideas when you're taken as, well, I don't believe that, or not. And yet you can embrace, well, there's something productive in having a chance to have a foil, to say. I see how it works out. It's not necessarily great. I often think, well, I'm showing too much tolerance to some of this shit. Some of it could be pretty heinous, if you want to make it be heinous. But I don't really want to, and it's just like part of a chaotic mixture. But I think that, so it's not necessarily justified by this, but I see how it could have a purpose. Even though I doubt I will convince you. ever of the things that you're talking about, that I should try to convince you. I should tilt against the windmills forever just from some duty. I would rather just explore the grounds around the windmill, describe the windmill, draw a 3D blueprint of it, make models, create other windmills with adaptations and improvements. And that's what I would rather do. Interact with the world, exchange information, give me new information. I promise I will convince myself of the ramifications of that information.
They used religion as a metaphor, like religious people are trying to convince people, but the difference is they're not using a truth, they're just trying to convince people of a faith, and that's kind of silly. You can't rationally argue in defense of faith. I mean, it's by its very definition irrational.
But that's exactly what they did, Gary, right? They did have all of this reasoning. It's illogic, but they had to have it. They memorized it for thousands of years. They're still talking about it on YouTube, the very same things, and Pascal's wagers, and centuries of it. Right? And I agree. The difference is that you're trying to use something closer to truth. I mean, you, us, whatever, this atheism argument is as an example. Okay, I agree, but I'm just saying that who invented convince? Invincible to fucking kick ass, right? To rape and pillage. Convince. With Vincent the Victor. Right? You have to create victory in their mind. That comes from religion. That's basically invented by religion as far as I'm concerned. Okay, technically invented by dogmatists, but dogmas are religions.
So you have even more of an obligation to be convincing.